24 hours. That's all that remains before the most unlikely victory in military history. A giant stands in a valley, undefeated for 40 days, mocking an entire nation and their God. An army trembles in fear, paralyzed by a single warrior they cannot defeat. A king offers his kingdom's wealth to anyone brave enough to fight, but finds no volunteers. And somewhere in the hills of Bethlehem, a teenage shepherd boy is tending his father's sheep, completely unaware that tomorrow morning he will kill that giant with a single stone. This is the story of the last 24 hours before David and Goliath. Before we journey through these final hours, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. And at the end of this story, rate from 0 to 10 how much this narrative of faith and courage inspired you. Let's begin. 24 hours remain. The sun rose over the valley of Elah, casting long shadows across the two armies positioned on opposite hills, and in the center of the valley, a figure emerged that made grown men flee in terror. Goliath of Gath. He stood over 9 feet tall, closer to 10 by some accounts. His bronze helmet gleamed in the morning light. His coat of armor, made of overlapping bronze scales, weighed 125 pounds. Most men couldn't even lift his armor, let alone wear it and fight. Bronze greaves protected his legs. A bronze javelin was slung across his massive back, and his spear, the shaft was as thick as a weaver's rod, the iron point alone weighing 15 pounds, more than most soldiers' entire weapon. Walking in front of him was his armor-bearer, and a man who carried Goliath's shield, a shield so large it protected the giant's entire body. This was day 39. For 39 days, twice each day, morning and evening, Goliath had stood in this valley and issued the same challenge. And for 39 days, Israel had produced no champion to answer him. Goliath's deep voice rolled across the valley like thunder. "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." His laughter echoed off the hillsides. "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." It was challenge number 78. By tomorrow morning, he would issue it twice more, numbers 79 and 80. But challenge number 80 would be his last. Goliath turned and walked back toward the Philistine camp, his armor-bearer beside him, utterly confident. Why wouldn't he be? For 39 days, no one had dared face him. He was from Gath, the city of giants. His brothers were giants. His entire family line descended from the Anakim, the fearsome giants that had terrified Israel's spies 40 years earlier. He'd fought in dozens of battles, killed hundreds of men, never been defeated, and certainly never by some Hebrew farmer turned soldier. As far as Goliath knew, tomorrow would be just like the previous 39 days. He would shout his challenge. Israel would cower, and the stalemate would continue. What Goliath didn't know was that tomorrow morning, a 17-year-old shepherd boy would answer his challenge, and that boy wouldn't be carrying a sword. On the opposite hill, inside the royal tent of King Saul, fear hung thick in the air. Saul stood at the tent opening, watching Goliath retreat back to the Philistine camp. Again, for the 78th time, and again no one in his army had volunteered to fight. Saul was the king of Israel, the first king, anointed by the prophet Samuel, the tallest man in Israel, head and shoulders above everyone else. But standing before Goliath, Saul felt small. "Your Majesty," one of his commanders said carefully, "the morale is—" "I know what the morale is," Saul snapped. 40 days of this. 40 days of humiliation. 40 days of that Philistine giant mocking Israel, mocking their army, mocking their God. And Saul could do nothing. He'd already offered an incredible reward. Whoever defeated Goliath would receive great wealth. I would marry Saul's daughter and would have his entire family exempted from taxes forever. A king's ransom, a princess, a family legacy, and still no volunteers, because wealth means nothing to a dead man. Saul turned away from the tent opening. He was afraid, and he hated himself for it. He was the king. He should be the one to fight. He was the tallest, the strongest, at least among the Israelites. But Goliath was different. Goliath wasn't just a man. He was a force of nature, a monument to Philistine power, a walking symbol of Israel's weakness. And the worst part? Saul knew, deep in his gut, though he tried not to think about it, that God was no longer with him. Samuel had told him as much. "The Lord has rejected you as king over Israel." The Spirit of God had departed, and in its place, dark moods and fears haunted Saul. Only one thing brought him peace anymore: the music of a young shepherd boy who'd been brought to play the harp for him. David, son of Jesse from Bethlehem. The boy had a gift. When he played, the darkness lifted. The fear subsided. Peace, however temporary, returned. But right now, that boy was back in Bethlehem, tending his father's sheep. And Saul was here, in a valley, facing a giant he couldn't defeat and a God who'd abandoned him. "Send out the evening watch," Saul ordered, "and double the sentries. If the Philistines attack during the night—" "Yes, Your Majesty." Saul sat heavily on his throne. Tomorrow would be day 40. In the Bible, 40 was a significant number. 40 days of rain during the flood. 40 years wandering in the wilderness. 40 days Moses spent on the mountain. 40 days of testing. 40 days of trial. And what would day 40 bring for Israel? Saul didn't know. But he feared it wouldn't be good. Down the line of Israeli tents, soldiers sat in small groups, speaking in hushed voices. They'd heard Goliath's morning challenge, number 78. In a few hours, they'd hear number 79, and tomorrow morning, number 80. "Someone has to fight him eventually," one soldier muttered. "You volunteer, then?" Another shot back. Silence. "The reward is incredible," a third soldier said. "Marry the king's daughter, never pay taxes again, your whole family set for life." "What good is wealth if you're dead?" someone countered. "Did you see his spear? The point alone weighs more than my entire sword." "Did you see his armor? It's like fighting a bronze wall." "Did you see his size? He's not human. He's one of the Anakim, the giants our fathers were afraid of." More silence. The comparison stung because it was true. 40 years earlier, when Moses sent 12 spies into Canaan, 10 of them came back terrified, reporting, "We saw the Nephilim there, the descendants of Anak. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." And that entire generation, the generation that was afraid of the giants, died in the wilderness without entering the promised land. Only Joshua and Caleb, the two spies who'd had faith, lived to see Canaan. Now, 40 years later, here was another giant, another test of faith, and Israel was failing again. Where are the heroes? Someone asked bitterly. Where are the men of faith like Joshua, like Caleb? No one answered, because the men of faith were apparently not in this camp. Evening was approaching. Soon Goliath would issue his 79th challenge. And once again, no one would answer. The stalemate would continue. Tomorrow would be day 40. Something had to change. 15 miles away, in the hills above Bethlehem, none of this mattered to David, son of Jesse. He sat on a sun-warmed rock, his shepherd's staff across his knees, watching his father's sheep graze peacefully across the hillside. The youngest of 8 brothers, David had been tending these sheep since he was old enough to walk. While his 3 oldest brothers, Eliab, Abinadab, and Shammah, served in King Saul's army, David remained home, doing the work no one else wanted. But David didn't mind. Out here, among the sheep and the hills, he felt close to God in a way he never did in town. Out here, he could sing, could pray, could play his harp without anyone telling him to be quiet or to get back to work. The sheep knew his voice. When he called, they came. When he led, they followed. The Lord is my shepherd, David sang softly, working out the words to a new song. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. One of the lambs bleated and wandered too close to a rocky outcrop. Hey, David called gently. Not that way. Come back. The lamb hesitated, then trotted back to the flock. David smiled. Sheep were defenseless creatures. They had no claws, no fangs, no way to protect themselves. They needed a shepherd, and David took that responsibility seriously. He'd proven it too. A few months ago, a lion had crept into the flock at dusk, seizing a lamb in its jaws. Without hesitation, David had chased after it, struck the lion, and rescued the lamb from its mouth. When the lion turned on him, David had grabbed it by its mane and killed it. Another time, a bear had threatened the flock, with same result. David had killed it with his bare hands and his staff. The sheep didn't know how many times David had saved their lives. They just knew they were safe with him. David picked up his sling, the same sling he'd used countless times to drive off predators, to hit targets at 100 yards, to protect what was entrusted to him. A shepherd's sling wasn't a toy. It was a weapon. David had spent years perfecting his accuracy. He could hit a target the size of a man's fist from 50 yards away. Not that anyone except the sheep knew that. To his brothers, David was just the kid brother who played music and watched sheep. To his father, Jesse, David was the youngest, the one who stayed home while the older boys went to war. To the people of Bethlehem, David was just another shepherd boy. But a few years ago, when something had happened that David hadn't told anyone except his family. The prophet Samuel had come to Bethlehem, had asked to see Jesse's sons. One by one, Samuel had looked at David's brothers, tall, strong, impressive men, and rejected them all. The Lord does not look at the things people look at, Samuel had said. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And then Samuel had asked, "Are these all the sons you have?" "There is still the youngest," Jesse had admitted, "but he's out with the sheep." "Send for him," Samuel had ordered. When David had arrived, still smelling like sheep, Samuel had done something unthinkable. He'd taken out his horn of oil and anointed David as the future king of Israel. Right there, in front of his brothers, in front of his father. The Spirit of the Lord had come powerfully upon David from that day forward, but nothing had changed outwardly. David was still a shepherd, still the youngest, still the one left behind. He didn't understand God's timing, didn't understand why he'd been anointed if nothing was going to happen. But he trusted. The same God who'd given him strength to kill the lion and the bear had a plan. David was sure of it. He just didn't know what that plan was yet. The sun was beginning to set over Bethlehem. David gathered the flock, counted them, all present, and began leading them back toward the sheepfold for the night. Tomorrow would be another quiet day of shepherding. Or so he thought. That evening, in Jesse's house in Bethlehem, the old man sat at the table, troubled. His 3 oldest sons, Eliab, Abinadab, and Shammah, had been away at war for over a month now. He'd heard reports of the standoff with the Philistines, of the giant who challenged Israel daily, but he'd heard nothing from his sons. Were they well? Did they have enough food? Were they safe? Jesse made a decision. When David came in from the fields, smelling of sheep and open air, Jesse called him over. "David." "Yes, Father?" "I need you to do something tomorrow. Early." David set down his staff and shepherd's bag, listening. "Take an ephah of roasted grain and 10 loaves of bread. Take them to your brothers in the camp. Also take these 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit. See how your brothers are doing, and bring back some assurance from them." It was about 15 miles to the valley of Elah where Saul's army was camped. David could leave at first light, arrive by mid-morning, deliver the supplies, check on his brothers, and be back before dark. "What about the sheep?" David asked. "I'll have one of the servants watch them for the day. This is important. I need to know your brothers are well." David nodded. "I'll leave at dawn." Jesse studied his youngest son for a moment, the boy Samuel had anointed. Jesse still didn't understand what that meant, but he knew David was special, different from the others. "Be careful," Jesse added. "The Philistines are near. Don't take risks." "I won't," David promised. That night, David went to sleep early, not knowing that tomorrow would change his life forever, not knowing that his father's simple request would place him in the valley of Elah at the exact moment Goliath issued his 80th challenge, not knowing that God was positioning him for the defining moment of his youth. He fell asleep thinking about sheep and roasted grain and a 15-mile walk. Tomorrow he would think about giants and stones and the glory of God. 20 hours remain. As night fell over Israel, multiple stories were converging toward a single moment. In the valley of Elah, Goliath slept peacefully in his tent, confident that tomorrow would be no different than the previous 39 days. In the royal tent, Saul tossed restlessly, plagued by fear and the knowledge that God had departed from him. Throughout the Israeli camp, soldiers whispered about the giant, about the impossible challenge, about their own cowardice. And in Bethlehem, young David slept soundly, dreaming shepherd's dreams, completely unaware that tomorrow he would need every lesson he'd learned in the fields. The lion he'd killed had taught him courage, The bear he'd defeated had taught him that size doesn't determine victory. The hours spent with his sling had taught him accuracy, and the years spent with the sheep had taught him to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. And the anointing of Samuel had taught him that God chooses the unlikely. All of it, every moment of his 17 years, had been preparation. For tomorrow, for one stone, for one giant, for one impossible victory that would echo through all of human history. The stars wheeled overhead. The night deepened. And in a few hours, David would wake up, gather supplies, and walk straight into the most famous battle in the Bible. Not knowing he was the answer to Israel's 40-day crisis. Not knowing he was the champion God had prepared. Not knowing that his name would become synonymous with courage and faith for thousands of years. He simply knew he needed to check on his brothers and bring back word to his father. Sometimes, God's greatest plans begin with the simplest obedience. 18 hours remain, and David is about to leave for the valley.